in a company called Abacus+. Not very internationally famous company, but still that's where I learned most of the things that I'm going to teach you today. So today we will talk about JavaScript and jQuery. Who of you here is already familiar with any kind of programming? Any kind of programming? Okay, nice. Okay, good. Then let's start. So, the basics of JavaScript. First of all, it's the scripting language of today's web. You can find it everywhere, pretty much on all the pages. It can add functionality, it can add, you can validate forms, you can improve user experience a lot with help of JavaScript. Before you learn it, you can't even notice it, but after you learn how many things you can do with JavaScript, it's quite amazing what all you can accomplish with it. It has nothing to do with Java. Some people are confused if they are somehow alike or something, but it's completely different from Java. It just copies a few names from JavaScript. Otherwise, they are used for different things, and the structure is different and everything. Then another important thing, you didn't learn this yet, but I think you will tomorrow. In web pages, there are always two sides. There's a server and there's a client side. The client sends a request to the server, and then the server sends the web page back to the client. So the client is the user of the web browser, and JavaScript is always running on the client side, while PHP, for instance, or ASP or Java are running on the server side. So what this means is that, first of all, the user can turn off JavaScript. So your web page should always work even without JavaScript, because it's always a possibility that the user will turn off the JavaScript, and if the web page doesn't work without it, then it's quite useless. And also the thing is that it might run a bit differently from browser to browser, but it's pretty much standardized, so you don't really have any problems with that. Today there are two new standards which are not so well known yet, but maybe you've heard something about it yesterday, HTML5 and CSS3, which are really quite amazing, and you can do some things in those two standards instead of JavaScript. But still, it depends what you want to accomplish, and they're still not so supported by all the browsers, so for now it's still better to use JavaScript, which is much more supported around all the browsers. Okay, now if we continue. Normally you can write JavaScript inside the HTML file. That's the first line. You can just put this script line with JavaScript, and then you type code inside of this text. But that's very nasty programming. It's not very clean, it's not very nice, because we usually try to separate everything. We put CSS in one file, HTML in another file, JavaScript in another file. So the second option is much better. You just include the script.js into your HTML file. So you put this line in the head section of your HTML file. And then you write all the code in the script.js file. Of course, you can name it however you want it, but we always use the JS in the end for JavaScript. At the end of the slide, you can see the no script tag. This is for the browsers which don't support JavaScript, or when JavaScript is turned off. In that case, just the no script text will be shown, and with this you can easily tell to the user that you are using JavaScript on your web page, and that without JavaScript it just doesn't look so cool or doesn't work properly. So this, I hope it's understandable. That's how you include JavaScript into your HTML file, so into your web page. Okay, now the first and the most simple thing is comment. You can use either one-line comment, you can do them with two slashes, or you can use multi-line comments with the slash and the asterisk. Please do use comments, because when you are writing a code, you understand what you're writing, and writing a comment seems like a waste of time. Why would I write it? I understand it anyway. But if someone else is reading your code, he won't understand it. Maybe okay, the most basic things, yeah, but when you come to more complex code, it's usually really difficult to understand. And even if you read it like in a few months or in a few years, you won't understand your code. So do write comments, it's good for you and it's good for everyone else. Okay, now variables. Those of you who already have done some programming, those of you know what variables are. Basically, those are locations where you store data inside the program or inside the script. So variables can be either, it can be, in JavaScript it can be number, text, object, we will look at object later, or it can be Boolean value, which is either true or false. So you can just show if something is true or false. The name of the variable can include any letters and any numbers, but it should start with either a letter, a $sign, or the underscore. It's a common practice that if you try to name the variable somehow logical, I don't know, if you put fruits into, if there's like a string of words which has something to do with fruits, you will name the variable fruits. So it's logical while you're writing the program. And if the variable consists of a few words, I mean the name of the variable, if it consists of a few words, you normally start, you can either separate the words with underscores, or you can put each word with a capital letter. You start it with a capital letter, so it's easier to read than just all small letters. You can change the value of a variable at any time inside the program or inside the script. And yeah, JavaScript is a loosely typed programming language, which means that you don't need to define what you will put inside one variable. Because in some languages, you need to define, okay, this variable will be a number, this will be a string, this will be a Boolean, and there are many more of these types of variables. In JavaScript, it's much more simple. You don't need to do that. You just write the name of the variable and then add a value to it. So it's really simple. Exceptions are array and date. We will see it later. At the bottom, you can just see a few examples of how you define variables, a number, a string. So a string means a word or a few words or a letter. An array and Boolean, which is either true or false. So data types. Basically, I've already told you about data types. It can be either a string, so words, letters, and you always put a string inside quotation marks. And always when you define one variable, you put, as we can see in the previous slide, you put a semicolon in the end. It's quite a common thing in programming that after each variable, after each function or whatever, you will see it later, you put a semicolon in the end. So Boolean, true and false. Oh, and number. With number, you just write a number. It can also be, well, any kind of number. And then objects. The two most common objects are arrays and date. Date is, well, for writing dates. We have a special data type date, because with the help of that you can actually, I don't know, you put a date inside of a variable and then you can later find out which day was that date, or you can calculate with dates. It's much easier if you have a special variable, a special data type for that. And array is a special data type which consists of many other objects. So you can put strings inside, you can put numbers inside, you can put booleans inside, whatever you want. And in some cases it's very useful. You will see. If you, I don't know, when you get data from database, for instance, you will store it inside an array. You won't make a variable for every data separately, you know? It's much easier to just store it inside an array. Well, and then there are two special data types, which are null and undefined. They are maybe a bit more difficult to understand in the beginning, undefined means that you didn't define any value to a variable. You just wrote s semicolon. And okay, there is a variable, the name is s, but it has no value at all. And then there's null, which is similar but a bit different. You actually add a value to a variable, but it's null. So it's not a number, it's not a string, it's basically nothing, but it does have a value. In some cases, it's useful, and you will see that with some examples, and when you will program yourself, you will see that it is useful sometimes. So far, it's all clear, all understandable. Are we going too fast? Okay. I hope if anyone has any questions, please just ask, raise your hand. I'll try to answer. So here you can see. Yeah.
I have a question. An array can hold other type of objects other than strings, like multiple objects, like an array of arrays.
Yeah.
Can it hold it?
Can have an array of arrays.
Okay.
It's actually a very useful thing, an array of arrays. Good question.
Could you please repeat the difference between null and undefined, please?
Null and undefined. Okay. Undefined, you just define a variable, just the name of it, but you don't define any value to it. So it does exist, but it has no value whatsoever. That's with undefined. With null, you do add a value to it, but that value is like nothing. It's null. It's maybe a bit difficult to understand at the beginning. Null is useful, for instance, when one variable already has a value, but then you need that variable for some reason without a value, so you will put null. You will put it to null because you can't undefine it. That's not possible. Okay, so there is a small difference. In some cases, in some practical examples, makes more sense.
But undefined is like random.
It's not random. It has no value at all. It just the variable exists, but it has no value at all. It just exists. Okay. It's like you declare the variable, but you don't initialize it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So arrays. I think maybe some of you have heard about this joke. There are one types of people in the world: those who start counting with 0 and those who start counting with 1. So JavaScript starts counting with 0, which means that arrays have indexes. Those are like like spots, like places in the array. So the first place in the array has the index of 0. The second place has the index of 1, and so on and so on. It's quite common in programming that you start counting with 0, that indexes start with 0. But I think that ASP, which you will learn tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, I think that ASP starts counting with 1, which might be a bit confusing at the beginning. But I'm not really an ASP programmer, so I don't know that much about it. Well, we are at JavaScript now, so JavaScript starts counting with 0. Which means that here we created a new array. The name of the array is vehicles, and it consists of 3 strings: a car, a truck, and a van. So if we want to print out vehicle with index 0, it will be a car. And if we want to add another item to the array, we can just do it like in the 3rd line: vehicles at index 3, and we add bicycle, for instance. It's so simple. There's a function which is called array.length, and actually in this case it's a typo. It shouldn't be array.length, but it should be vehicles.length, because you need to put the name of your array dot length, and it will tell you the length of the array. But here you need to be careful, because for instance the length of this array in the beginning is 3, because it has 3 items, while the indexes are 0, 1, and 2. So if you want to get the last item from the array, you need to use array or vehicles.length -1. Is that clear? Okay. It's quite a common mistake in the beginning because, I don't know, you just put length inside and you think that that's it, but at array.length there's nothing there. Because that's index 4, or in this case, yeah, that's index number 4. If we add bicycle as well, it's index number 4, and there's nothing at index number 4. It's undefined. At the bottom, there's a maybe even easier way to define an array. You just use those square brackets and put items inside the array. So those are two ways how to make an array. Okay, now those were the very basics. Now let's get to some more interesting things. Conditional statements. We use conditional statements where you have like 2 or more options. So it's with conditional statements, if one thing is true or if one condition is true, one thing will happen, and if another condition is true, then something else will happen. So in this case, I declared variable x, the value is 5. And then we asked, if x is 10, then write x equals 10. Document.writeLinen, that's a quite common thing in JavaScript. It just writes something to your screen or to your browser. You don't really need to understand it now. It's just important that it writes something to your screen. So that's how the easiest way to output something. So in this case, x is actually 5, and we check if x is 10, but of course it's not. So the first statement won't happen. The second statement, however, will. It's like, if this is true, then do this, else do this. And you can add more the if statements. There can be if x is 10, do this, if x is 9, do this, and so on and so on. So you can put as many if statements as you want. And else is also optional. You don't need to put the else in the end. It's just the default thing that will happen if none of the if statements are correct, then the else statement will happen. And then there's another conditional statement, which is a switch. This one is very interesting and maybe not used so many times, but in some cases it can be very useful, because instead of using many if, and then else's, you can just use a switch statement. In this case we have an array called fruits, and we have different fruits in them. So maybe the switch statement is a bit more complicated, but still not that much. Oh, and I made another mistake. It should be switch fruit. In the brackets there should be fruits. Because in this case, we will go through the whole fruits array. And in case if the... It should be done a little bit differently, I'm sorry. This is a bit bad example. But well, the important part is, if we put a banana in the switch statement, then the first statement will be true, like case banana. The banana is true, so we will write it's yellow. And you need to put break behind it, after it, because if you don't put the break statement, the switch statement will just continue. So it will also check for strawberry, and it will also check for default. So okay, the strawberry won't be true, but the default part is like else, which we saw before on the previous slide. So if we don't put the break line in there, the default line will always be true, because it's the default one. So this break is quite important, and we often forget to put it there. Also one of the mistakes that are quite common in the beginning, but later you get used to them. So the switch statement, we should really look it in some real life example, because it's much more understandable. But on the other hand, I guess it's still quite clear how it works, right? It is. Okay. It's also common in other languages. You have it in Java. You don't have it in PHP. I don't know about ASP. You have it in ASP. Okay. Okay, next thing is operators. Operators, well, these things are really logical because we use it in math, most of them, so it's plus for addition. And you can also, if you have two strings, you can put them together with a plus sign. So it's like adding two strings together, and it works for numbers as well, of course. Minus for subtraction, multiplication, division, then modulus. That's something that you maybe haven't seen yet, but modulus will return you the remainder of a division of two numbers. So it's the easiest way if you check the example. So if we put 15 modulus 7, the result is 1 because 7 times 2 is 14, so the remainder is 1. Okay, is that clear? And then there are two additional operators, which is plus plus and minus minus. These are very useful in some statements, which we will see later on, and it means that you just add 1 to the value. So for instance, if we have a variable x with a value of 5, and in the next line we will just write x plus plus semicolon, the x will turn to 6. It just adds plus 1, adds 1 to the current value. And minus minus, it just decrements for 1, so it just it's the current value minus 1. Very useful thing in some cases. We'll see that very soon. And these are operators for comparison. We can use this inside the if statement. You've already seen it before, when we had an if statement and we checked if x equals 10, if you remember that. So we checked with x equals 10, you always put two equals signs. So in this case, we check if x equals y, we put two equals signs. If you put just one equal sign, it means that you will assign some value to the variable. If you put two equal signs, it means that you want to compare two variables, two values. It's a completely different thing, and it's also used in different ways. Like, of course, if you use, if you want to add a value to one variable, you use just one equal sign, and this one is just used in like if statements or that kind of things. Also in switch statements. Then is less than, is more than. Sorry, another typo. The first one is less than, the second one is more than. That's, I guess, pretty logical. Less than or equal, greater than or equal, and the last one is maybe also something new. With the exclamation mark, we usually, in programming, we usually define negation. So exclamation mark and equals means it's not equal. And also, for instance, if we have a Boolean value, so those are the true or false, and we put an exclamation mark in front of it, it will be the opposite. So if we have Boolean with a value of true, and then we put exclamation mark in front of it, it's actually false then. For instance, if we have an if statement, if something equals true, we can add if something, exclamation mark, we put exclamation mark in front of something, something is the name of the variable, we put the exclamation mark in front of it, which means that we will change the value of it from true to false, or vice versa. Okay, that's all clear. And then we have logical operators. That's also something that we use in math sometimes, but in programming or in computers in general, it's a very important part of computers. And, or, and not. Okay, I've already told you about not, so that's the negation. And if we have two booleans, it's the easiest way is to explain this with boolean values because they're true and false, and that's basically what you're checking here, if something is true or if something is false. So if you use the AND operator, both values have to be true. Otherwise, the statement as a whole is not true. While with OR, when we use the OR operator, either one of the two values needs to be true. So if one is true or the other one is true, the whole statement is true. If both of them are false, then the statement as a whole is false. I hope that makes sense. It makes perfect sense to me, but because I'm studying computer science and this is really like the very basic of computer science and the thing that you use all the time. But I hope it's understandable. Yes, please. Okay. And yeah, the not, I've already told you about not. False, so you just negate any value. Next, some useful and interesting things about operators. The first one, x plus equals y. That means that we will first add 1 to x. We will add together x and y, and then we will store it inside the x. So if you want to add two values together, for instance, we have x, which equals 5, and we have y, which equals 10, we can just do x plus equals y, and from that moment on, we will have 15 in the variable x. Okay? It's like a shortcut for adding numbers together. The same with minus. I guess that's quite logical then. And the thing is at the bottom, it's maybe a bit more complicated, but I really like to use it because instead of 3 lines, you can just use 1 line in this case. So what this means is we want to add some value to variable x. So we will check, instead of using the if statement, which would make us to do like 3 lines, we can just do this 1 line. And we check if y is lower than 5, that's the we compare those two. Then we add a question mark, so if this statement is true, if y is lower than 5, then we will set the x, variable x, to 10. Otherwise, so it's like the else clause, like the else statement, or like the default statement. Otherwise, the x will equal 15. There's like an example at the bottom line. So if y equals 15, then x is 10. Otherwise, x is 15. Maybe a bit complicated at the beginning, but it's really useful. I mean, useful. Again, it's a shortcut. Instead of writing 3 or 4 lines of code, you can just write 1 line, and it looks really clear and really. We usually try to write code as clear as possible, so it's easier to read later on. And that's more shortcut than infinite. Loops. Loop is another thing. Like, for instance, if you've ever seen a dog who's trying to catch its own tail, well, loop is a similar thing. We are doing something in a circle, and at some point when the dog will catch its tail, then that's when we exit the loop. So we have a few different types of loops. First one, and the most simple one, is for loop. There's a description at the top of this slide, but I think it's easier if we just check the example at the bottom. Basically, okay, the var that you see there, var I, you can define variables by adding var in the beginning, which means that when we'll learn about the functions, the var word just means that variable will be defined just for that function, but it's not important right now yet. I will tell you that again when we come to functions. So in this case, you can just ignore the var. Anyhow, we define variable I and we set it to value 1. And the second part is a condition. We check if I is lower than 10. So while that condition is true, the loop will go on. And the third thing is how we added the value of the variable. So in this case, you will remember from before, I++ means that we just add 1 to I. So what this loop will do, first we define variable I as 1. Then we check if I is lower than 10, which in the first case of course it is. Then increase I by 1. And this will just go on and go on until the I won't be lower than 10 anymore. So until I will be 9. When I will be 9, the loop will happen again, and then it will stop. So each time, in each loop circle, we can do something. We can either increment some number, we can add some string to something, or it depends what we want to do, but it's something that we do, that we repeat. Okay? We can go through an array of strings, for instance. You have an array, and then you just use I as indexes, for instance. That's a very common example. And print out every part of the array, everything in the array. If you don't know what the size of the array, you can use this kind of loop. For instance, var I, in that case we will use I equals 0, because JavaScript start counting with 0. And we'll put while I is lower than array.length. If you remember from the beginning, and I++. We just increment I for 1 every time, and we will go through all the indexes of an array. That's a very common thing why we use loops. Another loop which is a bit different is while. But now I think this is quite self-explanatory. If we check the example again, we define a variable before the loop in this case. Again, we have the condition while I is lower than 10, and then we do something inside that loop. Like in this case, we will just write out the I. So first time it will be 1, next time 2, next time 3, and so on. And in this case, we need to increment the variable manually, because it's not the part of the loop itself to increment the I variable, so we need to do it inside the loop. And we can do it, I don't know, you can just do it like I++ and just increment for 1. You can increment for 5. You can do, it depends, it really depends on what you are doing. But this is the very basic example. And this loop does exactly the same thing as the previous one. Next one is do while. It's very simple to the while one. The only difference is that first we do something, first we do that something, whatever we want to do inside the loop, and then we check if I is lower than 10. So which means that it will happen at least once for sure. Because first we execute the loop and then we check if the condition is met. So it executes once for sure, and then it checks for the value. So it's a little bit different. Again, it depends from what you need, from what you want to do. Then this one is very interesting. It's the for in loop. So this one is usually used for arrays. Example: we have array the universe, and we have some planets in that array. We will just use the for loop, and inside the brackets we use for planet in the universe, which means that we will go through the whole array, the universe, and each time in the variable planet, each time it will be the next value from the array. The first time it will be the first value, the second time the second value. So basically what this for loop would do, is it would print out all the planets from the first one to the last one. The loop will execute 4 times. First time for Mercury, second time for Venus, then for Earth, and then for Mars. And then the array is over, so the loop will stop executing. Okay? It's a very useful thing for going through arrays, or mostly arrays. Okay, now we have functions. We're really going fast with this. So functions. A function is a piece of code which you want to use not just once but many times. So basically, if you want to, we'll just go to an example. If you want to add 2 numbers together, you will write a function like this. First, you start with this keyword function. That's how you define that you want to write a function. Then you write the name of the function. In this case, add this. It can be anything. You write the name however you want, but it's usually somehow explanatory about what the function itself will do. Inside the brackets, we put parameters. Function can have any number of parameters. It can also have no parameters at all. It depends on what you want the function to do. So what are parameters? When you call the function, we call the function at the very last line. Addition equals add this. So the parameters are the 2 numbers in this case. First number, which equals 3, and the second number, which equals 2. So what the function will do when we call it, we'll just do whatever is inside the function will happen. So in this case, we will create a new variable called total, and we will summarize those 2 variables. And the return statement, the return statement means what will the function return back. Because in this case, if we would forget to add the return statement, okay, we would add these 2 numbers, but they would just stay inside the function. So there will be no use for them. The final total would just stay inside the function. So we can't use it. That's why we use the return statement, which means that the function will actually return something to us. So if you look at the last line, addition equals add this, that means that the function will return that number. So it's basically in this example, well, we have 3 and 2, is the same as if we would write addition equals 5. But in this case, the function will do it for us. This is a very simple example, because we never use functions for these kind of things. Of course, we could just use addition equals first number plus second number, and the result would be exactly the same. But if you have like more complex code, if you have a few lines of code which do something more complex, and you want to reuse it a few times, either inside a program or maybe inside the loop, you can use the function inside the loop. So instead of writing that code all over again, inside one script, one program, if you need the same code a few times, instead of writing it a few times, you just write a function once, and whenever you want to do the same thing, you just call that function. And it's not just, first of all, you need to write less code, and second of all, it's again about clear programming. We try to use functions as much as possible, because we want to, it's a bad programming if you're repeating your code. You should never repeat your code. If you use the same procedure a few times, make a function out of it, and just call a function. And it's much easier, and you never know when you're going to need it again. JavaScript already has quite a few built-in functions, which means that those are the functions which you can call. You don't need to write them, you don't need to create them. They are already there for you. So mostly, because with JavaScript, we are usually trying to somehow manipulate with the HTML. So we are working with strings quite a lot, because we are literally editing HTML. So the string functions are quite popular. So here you see mostly string functions. These are not all the functions that exist. There are many more of them. But these are just, let's say, the most common one. We've already met the array.length, which returns the length of the array. And then with strings, so strings are letters or words. With strings, we have, for instance, char at. And then we put an index inside of the brackets, which means that we will get the character at that index in the letter. For instance, if we have in the word, I'm sorry. If we have a word computer, and we will write, we will call string. The string, of course, is the name of the string, name of the variable. We'll call string dot char at 0. The result will be C, because computer starts with C. So the letter at the index of 0 is C. Okay. Then string index of. In this case, it's exactly vice versa. We will write a letter, or it can be a few letters inside the brackets, and the result will be at which index, at which place in the string that that letter appears for the first time. String.split, and that's how we separate strings. The result of this is an array of strings. So basically, what would be a good example? I don't know. If we have a file name and instead of okay, let's just say we have a sentence and we want to split it to separate words. The sentence will be saved in one variable, and we will just put a space as the separator. So it means we'll put 2 quotation marks and a space between, which means that the result of that would be an array, and the values of that array would be all the words from the sentence. Substring, it just creates a substring of one string. So basically, it creates a new string which starts at index 1 and ends at index 2. As simple as that. String.length is the same as with array, but this time we are counting letters. String.toLowercase, it will just make the whole string lowercase. We also have string.uppercase, and so on. Number to string, it doesn't make that much sense in JavaScript because it's basically all the same. You can put either number or either string in a one variable. But in some cases this is still useful. We will just change a number to string. It doesn't mean that you will have a number 5 and then the result of this will be F-I-V-E. That's not the case. It will still be a number 5, but as a string. It's a bit different, but in JavaScript it's pretty much the same in most cases. Then we have date, get date. That's something that I mentioned already at the beginning. We can define a date, like we'll just write a year, month, and day. And we can use date, get day, and the result of this will be which day was it, like Saturday or whatever. Then another object that we have in JavaScript is math. We're using it for more complex mathematical operations. So for instance, math.round will round number x. So if x is like a decimal number, it will just round it to the first round number. Okay, if you have like 10.7, the result of this would be 11. Okay, and there are more of these functions, but whenever you need one function, whenever you need some kind of functionality, it's the easiest if you just check the documentation of JavaScript or try to Google it, because at the beginning you can't just remember all the functions. Later on you start to remembering them, but in the beginning it's a waste of time to trying to remember them, because there are more important things in programming than just remembering all the functions that there exist. Okay, now the document object model. or the DOM, or the DOM. So, you've already learned about HTML yesterday. The DOM defines logical structure of the HTML, or XML, or XHTML, which are pretty much similar. So, there are two different representations of what the DOM is. I prefer the right one, but I don't know how you can imagine it better. Basically, with the DOM, you can move along the tree of elements in HTML. So basically, it enables you to manipulate. This is what really enables you to manipulate with the HTML. Like, every HTML document starts with HTML tag, and then head tag, and after that you have a body tag. So basically, with the DOM, you can just say, okay, let's go to the body part of this document, of this HTML document, and suddenly you will have the whole body part of the document in one variable. Or you can say, okay, let's go to the first table in this document, and you will have the first table of the document, and you will be able to change it, to add some cells in it or whatever. You will see it later through examples. Basically, you will see it more in the JavaScript part of this presentation, because that's where we use it a lot. But for now, the important part is that you understand that this is what we use. It's not just a JavaScript thing, it's just a standard, it's language independent. It's just a standard for like moving along the structure of HTML so that we can do something with it. Now another thing, we've learned we've learned pretty much all the basics of how we write HTML, JavaScript, but we don't know yet how to really do something with it. Okay, I know how to write a function, but when will that function actually execute? How do I do that? So one thing that helps us with this are event handlers. On click, on mouse over, on mouse out, and so on and so on. There are quite a few of them. These are, let's say, the most popular ones, the most useful ones. And again, if we just look at the example at the very bottom line, for instance, we have an anchor which links to EESTEC.net. But before someone goes to EESTEC.net, we want to call some JavaScript before, when he clicks on the link. We want to do something. Before he actually goes to EESTEC.net, we want to run some JavaScript, we want to do anything. You can do many things with JavaScript. So this is the most simple thing. On click, so when someone will click on this anchor, an alert will pop up. The alert is the annoying pop-up thing which you see and you have to click OK or cancel or whatever. So this is just the most simple example. You can do on click, and then inside the quotation mark you can call one of your functions, one of the functions that you defined in the JS file, and so on. So this is how you actually start using JavaScript, how it will actually execute on your web page inside your HTML document. Okay? Is that clear? Okay. You will see more of this in the afternoon, I believe, when you have the practical part of this. I will also be there, and I hope we will write some JavaScript and we will see some real-life examples. Okay, now I think it's the last thing about JavaScript. It's Firebug debugging. Did anyone told you about Firebug yesterday? Anyone mentioned that? Okay, no. Firebug is a very, very useful extension for Firefox browser. I think it already exists for Chrome as well, or at least something very similar exists. And in general, web developers can't really imagine their lives or our lives without this extension. Because, okay, first of all, the most basic thing is that it shows you the source code of the web page. But okay, every browser can do that. But Firebug enables you much more. You can, for instance, just click on one image on the web page, and it will take you to the exactly to the point in the code, in the source code, where that image is defined, for instance. But okay, that's more about HTML. We're talking about JavaScript now. So what Firebug enables us, what it allows us is like, first of all, we can find all the JavaScript files which are included in the page. We can find them easily. There's a menu, we just click on it, and there are listed all the JavaScript files. We can click any one of them and we can see the whole script, we can see the whole source code. If there are some errors while the JavaScript is executing, the Firebug will tell us about those errors. It can even stop executing exactly when the error happens. And so we will see exactly where and when it happened. And after that, you can like continue running the code one line at a time so that you can see what happens after that. You can set some breakpoints inside your code, inside the JavaScript. Like when you're looking at the Firebug extension, you say, okay, I wonder what actually happens at this line in my code. So you set a breakpoint. You put a breakpoint there, refresh the web page, and when the JavaScript will run again, it will stop at that point. And then you can observe, you can see, you can check every variable, what's the value of it. Or you can even change the code or whatever. So it's really good for debugging. Instead of just trying and changing the code all the time, you can use Firebug and you can be much faster with that. So I would really suggest you, since all of you are here to learn web development, do download Firebug, because it will make your life easier. Yeah, it also includes a console where you can execute JavaScript on the run. You just type in anything and it will execute immediately on the site, which is also useful in some cases. And one thing that I use a lot for debugging is this console.log, and you can put any string or any variable or anything inside of that, and the output will be seen in this console of the Firebug. So it's useful for some kind of debugging. I don't know, for instance, you have a for loop and you're not exactly sure there's something going on in that for loop and there's something wrong, but you're not sure why. And you will just put some console.log lines and you will print out some values and you will see what's actually going on in that inside that loop. Because you will see sometimes you write something and you think that you know what you wrote, but the result is completely different from what you expected. So in these cases, you use stuff like this to realize, okay, maybe I wrote something else than I thought. Okay, so that's all about the JavaScript. Pretty much everything that you can learn, because there's not much more than you can learn about JavaScript. Of course, there are some details. Of course, there are many more functions, but I've told you about all the loops and all the possible statements and everything. So I suggest we make a break now, and we continue with jQuery after the break. Okay? I don't know, did you get coffee as well? Probably. Okay. Now you know pretty much almost everything there is to know about JavaScript. As I mentioned before, there are some other things as well. I just checked through my notes when I was preparing this lecture. I just checked my notes, and there are some more advanced things, but I really think that for today this is more than enough of JavaScript, because other things are just way too advanced to use it like in the first few weeks or month of working in JavaScript. So I don't really see the point of explaining that to you now, because you will forget it anyway, or you won't even understand it maybe. So I really think it's better if you just continue with jQuery. And later, after we finish with jQuery, we will make another break. And during the break, I will prepare some examples. So we will look at some examples, like real-life examples in the browser, how JavaScript works. Okay, good. Now jQuery. jQuery is like, it makes JavaScript more easier to write. It's a JavaScript library, and basically, if you look at it, jQuery itself, it's a file which looks really messy. It's a complete opposite of clear and nice programming, but it's really messy because it's really squeezed together so that it takes as little space as possible, so it doesn't make your page load any slower and so on. And what it is, it's basically a bunch of different functions, a bunch of things that you can use for your development. And it really makes using JavaScript much easier and much different, because basically when you learn jQuery, you're pretty much using jQuery, not JavaScript anymore that much. You can download it from jQuery.com. It's for free, of course. And you include it in your web page, in your HTML document, just as we learned on the second slide, I think. So basically, it's just one more JavaScript file, but it's a very powerful JavaScript file. So one thing that we usually write when we are using jQuery are this first line at the bottom of the slide. This means that when the document is ready, which means that then when the page is fully loaded, the things which are inside of the brackets, how are they called? Twisted brackets or something like that. Those ones. I'm not sure. Anyhow, whatever is inside of those brackets will execute or will wait to execute at some event on the web page. You will see the examples later, so you will understand it. But this line is very important, because we normally, when we write JavaScript and we are using jQuery, we pretty much always add this line first. And then we write all the functions and all the other stuff inside of this, where it says your code here. Okay, so if we continue. The most basic stuff with jQuery are selectors. They are used for matching elements in an HTML document. So if you've learned about DOM before, the DOM, this is what we use to search through the DOM, to find the elements that we want. So basically the star means all, so it's all elements. So I don't know, we can first move to a table and then use the star. You can see at the bottom line how we actually use it. And then use a star, which means that you will select all the elements inside that table, and you will be able to do something with them, to manipulate them. So if you look at the last line, this is how we select one class inside the DOM. You've learned about classes and IDs yesterday. In HTML, you define elements with classes and IDs. I hope that you understand that. So that's one very important thing, how we find a specific element inside our document. Like, for example, we have a drop-down menu, and we have a button. When we put our mouse over that button, we want to see a drop-down menu, which means that we will need to add some kind of jQuery code which will execute when someone will put his mouse cursor over that button. And we need to define that button somehow. We need to find it inside the DOM. So So we normally find it with the help of ID or class or any of these selectors. It can be, in some cases, all, but that one is, I would say, not so useful. Class we use the dot and then the name of the class. ID, we use the hash, it's called hash, right, I guess, and the name of the ID. Then there are contains and empty. So contains means that we'll check which object, which elements this element contains. You will see it in the example later. And the empty means that the element that we want to select needs to be empty. So, for instance, we have two input fields. And there's some text in one input field, and there's no text in the other input field. We want to select the other one. So we will use input colon empty. So we will use the second one. I don't know which one with the projector. Okay. So this at the bottom, it's a very simple jQuery code. We always started with the $sign. That's kind of like a symbol for jQuery. You can say it like that. Inside the brackets, we put selector. We will see some more selectors later. These are not all of them. Again, on every slide, there will be just some examples because I don't see the point of just listing all the selectors here on the slide because the slide will just look messy and you won't remember all of them anyway. You can go on jQuery.com, you can see the documentation there, and you can find all the selectors there. So in this case, we select the my class, and we will change the CSS property of that class. We will change the color, which will change the text color, to red. It's as simple as this. It's one line. So it means that whatever is inside the my class element will from now on have the text in the right color. Okay. We'll see more examples like this in the next slides. Traversing. So in addition to the selectors that we've seen before, we can also use these functions or methods. Children, each, first, parent, sibling, and so on and so on. There are many of them. Again, add is also one of them. Yeah, add is just in the example, in the first example, which means that the first example means that we will go to the first div inside the DOM element, and we will add a paragraph to that element. So in the first div, there will be a new paragraph after this line. P is the tag for paragraph. I guess you've learned that yesterday. The second example is a bit more complex. So in this case, we have unordered or ordered lists in HTML. That's UL for list and then LI for each item in the list. So in this case, we will use the each method. We will go through all of the items in a list. So we have the UL tag, and inside of that UL tag, we have many LI tags, all the items of the list. What this code will do, it will go through each of those LI tags. And for each one of those tags, it will execute a function. So we just write a function right there, inside of the each method. And again, what this function will do, it will just print out the index of that LI element. So for the first element it will be 0, for the second one it will be 1, and so on. And write the text. So again, we use $, this, and text. Text will return us any text which is inside some element. So basically, whatever is inside one HTML element, the text function will return you that. And this keyword, because we are going through all of the li elements, all of the elements inside the list, this refers to the element that we're looking at this moment. So it's very easy to define the element that we are looking at right now. It's like a for statement, which I've explained before in the JavaScript. So this is a very similar thing. It's a bit more complex example, so no worries if you maybe don't understand it completely right now. Yeah, the other functions, the other methods out there, they just do similar things. Children will return us all the children of one element. Each, okay, we've seen the example of each down there. First, we'll just return the first out of the elements. So if instead of each we would use first, we would just get the first item in the list. Parent would return us the parent element. So in this case, it would probably be UL, which means unordered list, probably, or ordered list. Anyways, it returns the parent of that element. I guess it's logical. Attributes. These are methods that we use to get and set the attributes of the DOM elements, so the HTML tags. Add class, so we'll just add another class to that element. That's simple. Attribute. Attribute means that we can set any attribute to that element. So you can set, I don't know, for if you have a form, we can set a name. We can set values to inside the input fields of a form. We can set URL to an anchor. Any attribute, we can just set it with this method. Has class. This one will check if one element has a class that we specify. Oh, we specify, for instance, the class, we specify it inside brackets. We just put quotation marks, and the class name inside it, and it will return either true or false if the element has that class. Remove class. We'll remove the class that we specify. HTML. This can either return or set. So get or set the HTML code of one element. Again, I guess it's quite logical. We can add some code. For instance, you want to make a pop-up window on your web page. When someone will click something, you will just, on that click, you will trigger the HTML method, and inside the brackets you will add the HTML code for your pop-up. So what will happen? That HTML will execute and the pop-up will suddenly be on your website. Okay? Value will return the value of, normally we use value for text area or for input or for select elements. Because those elements can have a value. You know, text area? You've seen it yesterday, I guess. So there's some text inside, and with val, you can get or set value to that text area. Put some text inside. An example at the bottom. For instance, we have a button with an ID button. And what we will do here is, first, we want to, I don't know, for instance, when we click on the button, we want to disable it. Yeah. So first, the class, the button had also a class enabled, which, for instance, made it red. When we click on it, we will select the button, we will remove the class enabled, and at the same time add the class disabled, which in the CSS, let's say it turns it into gray, so it's disabled. Or even does something else, so you can't click on it anymore or anything. Okay? So It's really simple to do things like add classes, remove classes, add HTML. Do basically whatever you want with HTML. Yes?
Can we put any number of methods to after we selected something?
Yes, you can. You can put any number of methods. They just need to be somehow logical, that they can actually execute one after another. But otherwise, yes, you can just like nest them. It's not actually nesting, it's just one after another. Manipulation. Okay. So these are methods for manipulating the DOM. There are some, I try to, there are like these aspects of jQuery. There are different like manipulation, and before that we had attributes and so on and so on. And some methods are the same. Like some of the manipulation methods we will use also in the CSS part of the jQuery. I'm just saying this because they might repeat sometimes, because it's not strictly just for manipulation, it's used for other things as well. Because jQuery is somehow separated in some parts, just logically, just to make it easier to understand or to remember. So I'm just saying that methods might not be just in one of these. So we have append, just append HTML or any text or whatever you put inside the brackets to the selected element. We select something and we append something to it. We have CSS. We've seen it as the first example of jQuery. Here you can change any CSS value of the element. We have an example at the bottom. Again, I used this, so it means I've told you what this is, like the keyword this, like in a for each statement. It defines the element that you're looking at the moment. But this is also used in some functions. You will see it through examples. So in the example at the bottom, we will change the CSS width, and we will add 200 pixels to it. So we will take the current value, the current width of the element, and we will increase it for 200 pixels, because width is usually set in pixels. It can be in percents, but then we need to specify it. If we don't write anything, then it's in pixels. Remove, remove any element. With this method, we can just change width of the element. It's basically the same as the example below. It's just a different way of doing the same thing. Empty, with empty we will just empty the element, so there will be nothing else inside it. It's like delete a part of it. And you can also, with width, for instance, you can also get the width of the selected element. Not just set it, but you can get the current value. Okay? Because many of methods in jQuery are like this, that they can do different things, depending on what parameters you give to the method. So if you don't give any parameters to the width, it will return you the current width. If you put some numbers inside the brackets, it will set the width to specified number. Okay? And there are similar examples like that. In many cases, we can add either no attributes at all, or we can put many of them. You will see some examples in the end. Okay, so CSS. There are quite a few methods which we use for changing CSS. We've already seen the first one, at least twice already. Position. Position can get the current coordinates of element on the screen. So basically, it returns you the position of the element in pixels. Useful thing sometimes. I can't say a proper example right now, but Add class, we've also seen this one already. Has class, also we've seen it already. So as I told you before, some methods are repeating, are not just in one section. They belong into different sections. So the example, we use another variable, p, and what we store into the variable p is the first paragraph on the page, in this case. P for paragraph, and first for the first one on the page. And what we do then is, okay, we'll just store a position of that paragraph inside the position variable. I guess it's a very simple example. Events. Okay, that's a more interesting part of jQuery. These are methods used to register behavior, take effects when the user interacts with the browser. What that means? When user is moving his mouse pointer across the web page, or clicking or double clicking or anything, we can see that the user did that, and we can do something, trigger some events on these user actions. So we can use, there are many methods which are handling this kind of things. Bind, click, keypress, hover. Hover is when you put your mouse over the element. Keypress is when you press one key on the keyboard. Click is click on the mouse. Bind is a bit more complicated, that's why I put an example at the bottom. So what bind does is, in this case, we select the element with the ID click me, and we bind something to it, which means that the first parameter is a click, so it's the type of the interaction. In our case, a click. It can be a double click. It can be a key press. There are different keywords reserved for this. And so each time when this will happen, when someone will click on the click me element, the function will execute. In this case, we will use the console log, the thing that we've learned before. It will write something into the console of our Firedog. It will just write this text, but it can do anything. Again, for instance, for a pop-up window, we have a button. We do button.bind, click, and some function, and when user will click that button, something will happen. I don't know, a drop-down menu will show up, or whatever. So, yeah, for instance, in bind, we can just we have to write the event type, of course, because otherwise we don't know what we are binding to. Are we binding? What kind of user interaction are we trying to bind something to? Then we can add event data, which means that we can send some data to the function. It makes more sense where you are actually making a dynamic web page, and you are actually making all this dynamically. So you are sending some data from the database, for instance, to the function, so that the function will do something with that data. So the last parameter, that's the second parameter, the data, and the last parameter is this handler, this function, which will actually execute and actually do some action on the web page. It's pretty much the same with all of these methods. Just the bind is the most, how to say, you can use it for anything, for different interactions. Those are more specific, for click, for key press, and so on. Otherwise, the parameters are pretty much the same. Effects. That's, again, one interesting part of jQuery. Here we can play around with different things like animate, fade in, fade out, hide, show, slide down, slide up, toggle, etc., etc. So does exactly what's written, exactly what's the name of the function. Except for animate. Animate is not so self-explanatory. Otherwise, fade in will just, well, fade in the element, or fade it out, so it will slowly disappear. It's the same hide will hide it, show will show it. Basically, it's the same as setting in the CSS, setting the visibility to none, or I think it's not. Toggle means that it will either show it or hide it. If it's currently hidden, then it will show it, and vice versa. If it's already shown, then it will hide it. Animate, again, because animate is not so logical, I made an example. Animate can do basically anything to an element. So the first parameter is what will change. In our case, opacity will change to 0.25. That's like the opacity, how visible the object is. If you set the opacity to 0, it will be like invisible, see-through. If you set it to 1, then it's completely visible. Like transparency, you can see transparency. We will change the left positioning, we will increase it for 50, so the element will move. And we will change the height to toggle. We'll toggle the height. The second parameter is time in microseconds. So this is how long the animation will take from the beginning to the end. If we want a very slow animation, we can set a large number of microseconds. If we want it to happen very quick, we can set it to 0, or we don't need to set it at all. The third parameter is a function. So again, beside the animation itself, we can execute a function again. So again, together with the animation, we can trigger a pop-up, we can trigger a drop-down, or whatever like we want to do. Yeah, that's it about effects. Okay, now jQuery plugins. jQuery can do really a lot of things by itself, but there are still many plugins which exist for jQuery. The most famous one is jQuery UI. UI means user interface. So this is like an increased version of jQuery, or I don't know, jQuery with some examples which you can use and modify. So basically, with UI plugin, you have a very simplified dragging and dropping of elements on the web page. You know, when you click something and drag it, put it to the other side of the screen or something. Resizing of elements, sorting, date picker. That's a calendar. When you want the user to enter a date, they never know how to enter a date, in which form they should put it. So you just use a date picker. When user will click on the input field, the date picker will pop up, and they will just click on the date that they want, and it's much easier, much user-friendly. Progress bar for showing progress of loading or whatever, and many more things again. The picture at the bottom, it's called Zoomy. That's another plugin for jQuery. It enables you to zoom on pictures, so it's as simple as that. I don't know, just add some code and somehow connect it with the picture. I don't know specifically because I've never used it, but in general it's very easy. And so jQuery and plugins can enable you stuff like this, to do some really crazy things and really increase the user experience on the web page and make it much more easier for the user and much more interactive and much more interesting and so on. So that's pretty much it about jQuery as well. I hope you understood most of it. So I suggest we make another break, 15 minutes or so, and after that we will go through some examples. Okay? So we will look at some examples now. Two more things. If you have any questions, if there was anything not understandable, you can ask me after the lecture, or I will be also at the practical part in the afternoon, so you can ask me then and I'll be there to help you. And the second thing, if you want the slides, they will be uploaded to the FTP server. I don't know if you have the data to connect to it. I don't have it yet, but the organizers have all the data, so if anyone wants the slides, you can get them there. Okay, now for the examples. Let's start with the most simple one. So that's just the document.write, the thing that we were using in examples in the beginning. So as you can see, what it does is it just prints a line of code. That's why we were using it in examples, because it's the simplest thing that you can do. It's like the hello world. That's how you normally start programming. With every language, the first thing you do is print hello world to the screen. So this is how you do it in JavaScript. Just here it's a bit different text, but we could change it. Anyway, okay, this is too simple, I think. So let's go to something a little bit more complex. In this case, this is what is much easier to do with Java. Yeah.
Can you zoom in a little bit?
Sorry, if I
To increase the font or to zoom in a little bit of the code.
Yeah. Okay, better?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's much easier to do this with jQuery, but here it's done in the old school way with JavaScript. So here we get we have a very simple web page. This is basically the web page. This is the source code, and this is how the page looks like in the browser. So we have this very simple web page, and script, JavaScript is here. We get element by ID. That's in jQuery. We will write this like document. Without document, just $sign and demo. So like this. Like this. Instead of all this, we could just write this in jQuery. And here we change the inner HTML to my first JavaScript. So in jQuery that would be just HTML and some random things in here. Okay. What it does, what this script does is, well, I guess you understand. It just change this the HTML content of the demo element, the element with ID demo. So this is it. Now I changed from my first JavaScript to my JavaScript, and yeah, that's the new output, not the rocket science. Okay, so that was the internal JavaScript file. What do we have here? Yeah. Here is the included JavaScript file. We've seen it already, so I've explained you this how this works. So I guess I don't think we need any more examples. Statements. What do we have here? So the statement, again, everything here is written in JavaScript, not in jQuery. I strongly suggest you to use jQuery because it's much easier, much faster. So you don't even need to learn these methods. You can just do it in the jQuery way, like I showed it before in the previous example. So again, basically here we just get an element and change the HTML of it. So that's nothing so special. Yeah, basically it's pretty much the same as the previous one. here we have a function. So, on click, remember this one? So when someone will click on the button, this function will execute. We have a function defined here inside the script text. So this is our function. Starts with the function keyword, then with the name, then with brackets, which could include some help me. Parameters. Thank you. Some parameters. And what the function does is exactly the same thing as the previous example. So it will just change the element with ID demo and the element with ID myDiv. We will just change the HTML. So basically, just adds this text. So we have also first it's written a paragraph and a div, and now we will change it to hello Dolly and how are you by clicking on the button. So when we click the button, this is here, on click, this function will execute. Okay? Alright. Single line comments, we've seen that. Multiple line comments, that's nothing special. To prevent execution, okay. You can use commenting to prevent execution, of course. It means that when you are programming something, when you're working something, and suddenly it doesn't work anymore, instead of deleting what you just wrote, you can just comment it. And you will execute the code again. Okay, now it works. So I just need to edit the commented line a little bit. So you don't need to delete it and then write it all over again. You can just comment it, and less work to do. Multiple line comments, variables. I guess these are also quite simple to understand. So this is a variable with which is undefined. So the value of this one is undefined because it has no value. That's the thing that we were talking about before. This is a string. Here so we write first name, but since the first name has no, we declare the value here. Then we have add break. We change the first name to Tom and write it out again. So that's what I've already told you. You can change the value of the variable at any point. You can declare a new value to it. I don't know, change this to Tits. That's my name. Click and edit. So the first time it's Hege. Next time we change it to Matits. Print it out again. And the value is Matits. If else. Let's go with this one. Okay. So if we go to the script first, again we have a function which will execute on click of the button. Okay? We've seen that already. So what happens inside the function? We have a variable x. Oh, I told you that I will explain the var keyword again. So basically what this means is that this, if we put the var keyword in front of the name of the variable, this variable will exist only inside this function. If we wouldn't use the var keyword, this variable would also exist outside of the function. So we could call it here again, x something something. It would exist here. Or we could declare it here already, x is whatever, and then we could use it inside the function. But if we declare it like this, then it exists only inside this function. That's the difference. Okay, so if we return to what happens inside this function, we declare x as an empty string, Okay, here we have a date. So we, what this does is it gets the current time, the time at the moment, but just the hours. So it would be 11. And if time is, here we have the if statement then, if time is lower than 20, the X would change to good day, else it would change to good evening. So right now, since it's 11, it should write good day. If we write here, if time is lower than 10, which is not,
Got it.
put this first, right, now it's good evening. Okay? Okay. And we can put as many if statements as we want. And we can either use else statement or we don't use it. Depends if we need it or if we don't. If we need that default statement. Switch, okay, we can look at the switch now. It will maybe be more easy to understand. It's pretty much the same again. Button, we click it, the function executes. And okay, this time we have a date called getDay, so it returns the day in the week. So what it does is, yeah, well, the name of the day is the variable d. So we will check, we will make a switch statement, we will check the variable d. So depending on which day it is today, one of these cases will execute. Okay? So today is Tuesday, right? So, yeah, it is. Today is Tuesday. Again, I hope you understand this. This one doesn't have a default statement because in this case it doesn't make much sense because we know which days there are in the week, so there's no default value for a day in the week. But sometimes you can add default and something. One more thing, when you're writing code, we usually use these tabs. How much? What's the space between the border of the editor and the first line, the first word in the line? If you know what
Indent. Indent.
Indent. Okay. Indent. So it's not strictly defined how you should write it, but you should do it somehow logically so that it looks good and that the style also represents the code. That you represent the if statement also with the styling of how you write the code, how you put indents and so on. It doesn't affect the code in any way. I think that's just in Python. In Python language, there are indents very important because you don't really use brackets, you just use indents. But in most or maybe even all the other languages, the indents don't affect the code itself, but it's just used for the code to be more understandable and easier to read. So the default shouldn't be here, it should actually be more like, yeah, but the tab doesn't work here, it should be in the browser. It should be here, something like that. What else? We have switch, alert box. We can check it out. I didn't explain it, the alert box. Well, I explained it just quickly during the lecture, but it's just something not so useful, but normally quite annoying, because we don't want this kind of pop-ups to show on our web page. Unless it's useful for instance, if you want to delete something to confirm before deleting, or stuff like that. Otherwise, I don't think it's used so often. Confirm box, bound box, basically the same things. Call a function, we've seen that already. Okay, function with arguments. Let's check that one. Okay, same story, but a bit different. Button on click, but this time we have function with arguments. Before we set parameters. There's a slight difference between an argument and the parameter, but I don't want to get into that right now. It's pretty much whatever you say is okay. So here we go give some arguments to the function. So when the function executes, it gets the parameter, name and the job. So it's Harry Potter and the job is a wizard. So I guess you understand. Here already, again we have an annoying alert with the name and the job. Okay, you see, it's like this. So basically, again, how you can use this, you can put, I don't know, hour, like we had before, an hour in the day in the function. You can put some data from the database. That's the thing that you usually use with dynamic web pages. Okay, so we understand the functions and arguments, right? I guess. Function that returns a value. Okay, so the function that we were looking at before, it just triggered that alert pop-up. Now what this function does, here's the function, it returns the value. So that's what I was telling about before. You can either just execute a function and do something within that function, or you can return a value. So you can declare that value to one variable, or in this case, what do we do here? Yeah, basically document.write, and normally we would write some kind of string in here. But in this case, we have a function which returns a string. Okay? So that's why we use a return statement. Again, in this case, we could just write hello world instead of my function. But if the function actually does something, is actually some complex code, then it makes more sense. Okay. For loop. I heard that I've explained it very well already, but maybe if someone needs an example. Okay, it's done with the function again, but we already understand that part. Here we have for loop. So if you repeat this again, first we declare this I variable to 0. Then we check when I is lower than 5. And then every time when the loop executes, the I will increase for 1. So in this case, we are just adding this string, the number is, and the current index, or the current value of I variable. If you try it, you can see this is the first index, and this is the index of the 5th time when the loop executes. I think it's quite easy to understand and quite easy to write as well. Okay. Okay, looping through HTML headers. That might be a more practical example. Okay, yeah, you learned about headings yesterday. You have H1 for the biggest heading, H2 for a bit smaller one, and so on and so on. So this is a bit more useful example of a for loop where we are generating some HTML code. We are generating it here, as you can see. So we are just, for the first time when the loop executes, we will add an H1 heading. And the second time it will be H2, H3, and so on. I guess you understand this. So that's a bit more useful example, a bit more real-life example. While loop, pretty much the same as for, do while. Okay, breaking a loop. Break and continue. That's something that I haven't explained yet, and is quite a nice thing sometimes. So, when we have a loop, under some conditions, we can break out of that loop, which means that if there are some conditions met, we'll just stop executing the loop, even though it's not finished yet. Like this is not true yet. This statement is not true yet, but we met some other statement because of which we want to break out of the loop. So we can add an if sentence here, if statement. So if we meet some, if this is true, we can either, continue or break. So break means that we break out of the loop. The loop will stop executing, won't execute anymore. And the continue means that the loop will just skip anything what happens here, and we'll just start from here again. So the loop itself won't stop, it will continue looping, it will continue executing. Just when this condition is met, whatever happens under this in the loop won't execute. We will skip it just for this time, just when this condition is met. Okay. It's useful in some cases. It's just also a good thing to know that you can do this as well. We've seen that already. So events, we've seen on-click event, on-no server is pretty much the same. Try and catch statement is, I think, something that you don't need right now yet. And advanced things, these are also some advanced things that I think we don't need yet. So those were the examples of most of the things that we've learned during the first part of the lecture. And now I can also show you some of the jQuery things. So the most interesting things are events and effects. Like click, for instance. There should be some examples here. You remember click? It does something when you click on something. Is this? Oh, that's just a picture. I'm not sure. Oh, yeah, okay. This what we see right now is just CSS and HTML. But now, as we click on something, when we click on one of the paragraphs, it will disappear. So, this is the CSS. I won't explain you this. You've already seen this yesterday. And this is the jQuery. So we select a paragraph, and when we click on the paragraph, a function will execute. What this function will do? It will use this element. So it's the element that we currently clicked. This is always the thing that we clicked, the thing that we are currently working with, and it will slide it up. So slide up is one of the methods of the jQuery. So when we click on the paragraph, it will slide up, and again, and now we ran out of paragraphs. Other things here are pretty much similar. I've explained you the bind method quite in details. Blur, change, click, double click, these are all the similar things that do. I guess they're quite understandable, yeah?
Can we have an example of one, please?
Fine, yeah, sure.
Okay.
So, bind, as I told you already, it's quite a complex method. Examples, let's see. So, what happens here?
Sorry, can you zoom in?
Yeah, sure. Sorry. Okay, is it better now?
Yeah.
I think we can still see the whole code. What happens here is we bind something to a paragraph. We bind it on click. One more thing that I can mention here. In JavaScript, you can either use double quotation marks or single quotation marks. It doesn't make any difference. Okay, so when we click on the paragraph, this function will occur. Okay, here is also the event is used. I didn't explain you the event that much. So it's a bit more complicated example. But basically, it will select this first span element, and it will change the text inside it to click happen. And what it will add as well is it will add the position where the click happened. This is the event.page X and page Y. That's a bit more advanced and not really so useful thing. So that's why I didn't tell you about it. And then we also bind double click, in which case the text of the span element will change to double click happen. And we also bind the mouse enter and mouse leave. So there's when you put the mouse over the element and when you move it away. In which case we will change the class of the element to over. So when the mouse is over, the class will change to over. When the mouse is away, it will change. It will remove the class over. That's what the toggle function does. So now if we check the example, okay, first the mouse will be over. Now the class changed. That's why the color changed, because that's how it's defined. The class is defined like that in the CSS. Now we click it, so it's changed. Click happened. You see, and if I click it somewhere else, the coordinates will change. So if I double click it, double click happened. Okay. So this is actually a very good example of a bind method. You can see click, double click, mouse enter, mouse leave. So it's like mouse over, mouse out, the same thing.
Is it useful to understand what a user do on a pop-up, on a publicity?
If it's useful, like I mean,
If you want to know if somebody has done something on a pop-up,
yeah,
or use this one.
Yeah, you can use this. And then you can really track everything what the user has done. That's a really detailed data then actually. It depends on how you can do it. But yeah, you can use this. But then you would have to add Ajax to save that data to the database and so on, but that's too much for now. I don't know, maybe you will learn about Ajax, but probably not because okay, I won't go into that. Effects. Okay. Actually, we've seen effects already, but we can check another example, like animate, for instance, which is the most advanced one, I think. If you remember it, so where's the example? Okay. If you remember it, you can first, in the animate method, first we define what we want to change, what will the animation actually change. So these are basically CSS values. Then we change the time, which is in milliseconds, not in microseconds, as I said before. Someone corrected me, thank you. And as the third parameter, we could add a function. So that also one function would execute and do whatever. So in this case, okay, we have click and animate. So first we will select the element with ID go, and if we click on it, the function will execute. What the function will do is it will select the block element, and it will animate it like this. It will change these CSS properties, and it will do it in 1,500 milliseconds. Okay, so let's see. I guess this is the button with the Go ID. Can you click it? The CSS change. Width increased from 70%, opacity changed, and so on and so on. Okay? So you can do some really cool animations with this. Nowadays it's possible to do quite a lot of this with the help of CSS3. But as I mentioned before, CSS3 is not so well supported, especially not in Internet Explorer browser, which is okay. I see you already know about that. Internet Explorer is a huge pain in the ass with CSS, sometimes even with JavaScript, because things just don't work there. I don't know why. They just don't use all the standards. While in Firefox and Chrome and Opera, things normally work as you put it. I don't know. We could check some other effects and some other stuff, but it's pretty much similar. All works in the same manner. You can also check them yourself. As you can see, it's on jQuery.com. You just go to documentation, and you have everything explained there. Here as well. Documentation, or in tutorials, you can see some additional tutorials. But mainly what you need is documentation. You have everything written here, all the methods. So basically that's it. What I can also show you, okay, I mentioned jQuery UI, the user interface. So if we just quickly check what you can do with that, like a date picker and stuff like that. I don't know, date picker is the most typical one. See, so we have a form, I guess, with an input field. We click on it, date picker pops up. Choose a date, that's it. We can choose in which form we want the date to be. We can choose the color of the date picker. We can basically modify it however we want. Yeah, as you can see here, format date, restrict date range, display. You have many different options. Other things that we have, autocomplete is one quite cool function. So basically, I don't know, if we have a database of some keywords and we know that the user will enter one of the keywords, we can just help him with suggestions like this, autocomplete. I don't know. I just write app, and this is the only possibility that I have. Okay, so it's useful sometimes. I don't know, where in cases where user might mistype something, or just to make it all easier for the user, to make a better user experience, which is very important nowadays. So that's the things. Those are the things that you can do with jQuery user interface. Yeah, okay. The last thing that I wanted to show you is the Firebug extension. So this is how Firebug looks like. Here I have all the source code. So whenever you, as you can see, whenever you choose something, it will also color it blue on the side. Whenever now I have my mouse over the top menu, so the top menu is colored in blue. Now I move to logo, so the logo area is colored in blue, and so on. Or we can like choose this and click on the logo, and it will show us directly where the image of the logo is. So it makes all debugging much easier because we are much faster. If you see that there's something wrong, we just click in that area and it will show us where in the code that is, and we can also edit the code. I don't know, like I can choose this anchor It's in Slovenian language, I'm sorry about that. This means edit. And I can change the reference to, I don't know, www.google.com. So now if you click on the logo, yeah, I didn't put the HTTP in front, but basically it went to google.com. Well, you understand that. You always have to put HTTP in front in the anchors if you want to point to a completely different web page with a different domain. Yeah, I guess maybe you've heard it yesterday. Otherwise, you will learn it. You'll have to learn it eventually. And regarding the JavaScript, here you have listed all the scripts that are included in this page. You can just click any of them and you can see the content of it. And here is the console. Oh, apparently there's an error. There's an error somewhere on EESTEC.net. Okay, great. We have an example of the error. So apparently somewhere an error happened. This is a notification. It's written where exactly the error happened. If we put the mouse over it, we can actually see the code, but this code is not what we call a clear code, but it is compressed code to take as little space as possible. That's why it looks like this. So this is apparently the line number 4. So this is where the error happens, but it's still quite difficult to find it in this case. Yeah, that's also one thing that might be interesting. That's how the compressed code looks like. So if we look at jQuery, we can download it here, and that's how it looks like. So this is jQuery. So it just looks like just some random code. Because it's compressed, because in this way it uses much less space. It makes a web page faster, but it still does exactly the same thing as a nice and clear code. It also exists in a nicely written form, but we normally use this one because it's smaller. I think that's pretty much everything I have to show you. We finished a bit faster. I guess you're happy about that. And we've learned most of the things that you can know about JavaScript and the basics of jQuery, but as I already said, there's no point in explaining all the methods, all the functions, because you can't just remember that you have to use it, and by that time you remember it. Memorize it. Okay, that's it. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.